doing? Listening to a little U2. Good stuff. One of the great Irish exports of their time. Today we're going to talk a little bit about other Irish exports that were not so nearly loved as U2. These days it's quite trendy to be Irish. Wait for St. Patrick's Day and everybody's Irish. Everybody's wearing green and pinching each other and looking for leprechauns and pots of gold and taters and whatnot. But in the early 19th century, when Irish immigrants arrived in droves to fill factory jobs, fleeing their native Ireland, they were not welcomed. We're starting Unit 4 here, ladies and gentlemen. There's the study guide, but yow. If yours looks as blank as that, you haven't been doing much. Time to get on it. Test next week, Monday, and it's important for us to go through this first part here and look at kind of the cultural eras, or cultural movements, I should say, that are going on during the age. So let's go for it. The first question asks us about the difference between the German and the Irish immigrants who came to America in the early to mid-19th century. Both arrived in order to try and fill a void. The Irish arrived really to do factory work. They were considered to be ideal in the sense that they were desperate for work. They had really no skills outside of rural potato farming, and that's not something we needed a lot of in America, and they were willing to do whatever it took in order to make a wage. That put them in perfect conditions to end up in northeastern cities like New York or Boston, and perhaps all the way out to Chicago. Irish immigrants arrived with their Catholicism and with their political machinery knowledge that they had developed over time, and they used both of those in order to knit these very tight-knit communities that eventually came to run those northeastern cities. But at the time, the Irish were quite hated. American nativism, that's the word we're using here, nativist sentiments rose against the Irish and against a lot of immigrants because Americans felt that they were taking their opportunities from them. The Germans, on the other hand, were not nearly as hated. The Germans tended to have money or a trade, and they parlayed either of those into settlements out west, where they found homes in places like rural Pennsylvania, rural Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Texas. Wherever the settlement of America happened to be, the Germans settled in as farmers or as artisans and became important parts of their local economies. Both the Irish and the Germans held on to a lot of their cultural ideals, many of them continuing to practice their native religions or speak in their native tongue, as for the Germans, and that might have earned them some scorn as well. Factors that contributed to the 1837 Depression. This is the Depression we talk about with Martin Van Ruin. Not Van Buren, but Van Ruin. The economy was horrific. About 1 in 3 Americans lost their jobs. Those who kept them lost somewhere between 30 and 50% of their wages. And really to blame for it was a combination of bad luck, canal bonds that had gone bad, as well as a souring economy overall. Bad planning is to blame by President Jackson, who had shut down the Second National Bank, and by doing so had encouraged the growth of state banks, which were far less conservative and therefore made risky ventures, which often went bad. And also a little bit of Van Buren's fault. Van Buren, in the times of financial hardship, pulled in the American economy in order to assure the government remained flourishing with money. Now, that's what you should do. That's the smart conservative bet. But unfortunately, it tanked the economy. Tippecanoe and Tyler too is the slogan in 1840 that the Whigs are going to use to try and get William Henry Harrison, that's Tippecanoe, and his running mate, John Tyler, elected to the presidency. They're in great shape. Martin Van Buren looks like he could get beat by anyone at this point, and so the Whigs put up Tippecanoe and Tyler too. They have parades and slogans and barbecues. The total Martin Van Buren 1828, this is how I get Jackson elected strategy, and it works. And they get him elected, and he's in office in a month, and he dies. And then John Tyler turns back to his Democrat ways, and unfortunately the Whigs have lost their first great opportunity to govern. Won't be the last time. Whoa! Don't wig out. It's going to happen again. See what I did there? It's a wig joke. Wig joke by a bald guy. Incredibly impressive. Moving along. Transcendentalism is a literary movement mostly that attempted to transcend, the problems in the industrial glut of society. America was moving in this industrial path towards progress and cheaper goods and more efficiencies, and we praised that in the last unit. But not everyone thought that was the way America should be going. The Transcendentalists wanted to get away from the ugly noise and the smell and the humdrum of factory life and tried to move out into the rural areas in order to create a movement that perhaps focused more on the individual, on the internal factors, and on nature. So you're going to see a lot of Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, Fuller, all of them active in this movement. The box below here discusses a group of utopian communities, all of whom attempted to challenge traditional American society. In other words, they did something different. They were not interested in running the mainstream. They're different in some sort of gradients, though. We're going to start with the Brook Farm group, which is really quite conservative by some comparisons, and then we'll go all the way to the Oneida community, where things were a little more freaky. All right, so starting with the Brook Farm group. Brook Farm is a transcendentalist writer's camp. You go for the time, and you're supposed to be working half the day and then writing or listening to music or doing something culturally enriching the other half of the day. The idea is that by doing that, you sort of enrich the soul with all these ideals of nature, and then later on in the day, in a burst of creativity, it comes flowing out of you as a way of writing poetry or by painting a painting. Level of success, well, they did all right. No one wanted to work, though. In the long run, they really depended on the sales of some of their prominent authors, and when the place burned down, I beg your pardon, in the 1840s, no one bothered to rebuild it, and that one was done. The Shakers. The Shakers believed that their leader, Mother Ann Lee Stanley, was a second coming of Christ. She was, in fact, Jesus' sister, the female version of Jesus, and that they as individuals needed to purify their bodies. So as far as practices goes, no alcohol, no sex, no politics, no war, complete gender equality, racial equality, economic equality. You can tell all of those challenge the distinctive American way that we have going right now. Level of success, quite high. In the short run, they made great furniture and made good financial moves. Now, that belief in not having sex is going to mean that it's hard to find new movement members in the next generation, and so they're going to have to go to orphanages and kind of get kids. And by doing that over time, they kept their numbers up. These days, 2 Shakers, still shaking. Keep it real, ladies. The Fourier phalanx. Fourier was a European who believed that boredom was the real root of all evil, and therefore human beings should be allowed to switch jobs, switch partners in life, and by doing both of those things, they would be able to enrich themselves and make for a much easier existence. Now, Fourier's phalanxes really didn't function at a high level of efficiency because most human beings, once they form a relationship, they want to stay in that relationship if it makes them happy. Fourier thought that they should keep on moving in order to be more happy. We human beings like happy. Sometimes we don't want more happy. We like happy. The Oneida Complex was a movement that believed that their leader, John Humphrey Noyes, N-O-Y-E-S, Noyes, was beginning to prepare them for this new age, okay, an age in which society was to be perfect. And one of the ways they were going to do that was abandoning traditional ideals. For instance, they practiced complete gender equality, right? The girls dressed up kind of like the guys, short haircuts, and they had this notion of complex marriage. Complex marriage meant that every member of the community was married to every other member of the community, and therefore the sexual ethics of the community really challenged the traditional American norm. How did it function? Well, for a while they made animal traps, and then they went on to make flatware, and they were pretty successful at all of this. Unfortunately, their group was constantly on the run from the law because of the fact that they were really bending the rules of marriage within the communities that they lived in. All 4 of these give us a look that not everyone is completely pleased with the society around them. America seems to be going in good directions, but some would say not great, and therefore they're willing not just to reform the movements of America, as we saw with the Benevolent Empire and the Second Great Awakening in our last movement, but they're looking to completely trash what America has and start fresh. And these are movements that attempted to do that. In our next video, we're going to start out with talking about the Mormon movement, and then we're going to take ourselves all the way into the next parts of the study guide. Do well, folks.